I'd like to welcome you here in the theater, and for those who are attending online, to a Speak Sooner community education program. I'm Bernard Bandman, and I'm Executive Director of the Center for Communication in Medicine. I'd just like to ask folks in the theater if they can silence their phones, please. And for those online, to really get the best video quality, to enter full screen. The topic this evening is comfort or conflict in end-of-life care. A discussion about what's missing with an advanced directive. We're going to begin the evening with a screening of Prognosis, Notes on Living, a film in which Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Deborah Chasnoff turns the camera on herself, her family, and healthcare providers as she faces the challenges of advanced breast cancer. The viewers here and online, just be aware, be advised that the content contains emotionally raw material. After the film, we'll have a brief break, and then we'll have our panel discussion. So let's watch the film.
I have stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and it's a bell curve, and I could be at one end of the bell curve and die soon, or I could live a really long time and maybe die of something else.
I'm going to do everything in my power to keep Chaz in this earth.
I'm not going to give up. Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
You're fine? Is that okay?
I'm okay.
Not only am I a patient dealing with this very serious thing, I'm still a social justice filmmaker. I want to demystify this experience. I may not have a whole lot of time left to live, and I have to figure out what's this new world, or what can my world be now?
You are a different person now, What's that like? What's going on inside?
I want to be as awake as possible. Maybe it will help other people be the same.
Where are we going now?
When I said this would be emotionally raw, certainly, but so truthful. What we'd like to do now is for all of us to catch our breaths actually, take a little break. We will be back in about 10 minutes and we will have our panel discussion. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Well, welcome back. We're about to start the panel discussion. And first thing I'd like to do is to introduce you to the panel. To my left here is Dr. Michael Welther. Dr. Welther received his MD from University of Wisconsin and completed a residency in family medicine at the University of Arizona. He has been a primary care physician in Arlington, Vermont for over 35 years. To Dr. Welther's left is Jenna Peeler. Jenna had lived a very active lifestyle until 2014, when she contracted myalgic encephalomyelitis. That was a tough one, I think. It's a chronic disease that affects multiple body systems and causes severe fatigue. Since that time, she has often been bedridden. Jenna has had to learn to be her own best advocate in navigating the healthcare system. To the left, to your right, of Jenna, is Nancy Eiserman. She received her MSW from the University of Connecticut, and she has 25 years experience working as a medical social worker and is currently employed at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center. And to Nancy's left is John Whalen, who received his Juris Doctorate from Vermont Law School and has practiced in Arlington and Manchester, Vermont for 25 years. His focus is on estate planning, trust and estate administration, and real estate matters. So, now what I'd like to do, and in many ways for you two to think of this as well, I'm going to ask the panel, what spoke to you in this documentary? I'll start with Dr. Welther.
I think what I gleaned from this movie was that it's probably the most real movie experience I've seen of what someone goes through with a terminal disease and the process it goes through for the individual, for the significant others, all the way to the point of death. And I think it was extremely real and very honest. The things that I take from it is that it's obviously a very lonely process. And you can see that even with all the friends and family that she had. You also get the sense that she really didn't want to know her prognosis, but it was difficult to tell if she really understood what was coming and how to understand that process. And I think there was some difficulty communicating with her physicians about, did she want to know what was coming and what was involved. So to me that's the takeaway that I take from it, that it was just a very lonely process, and what could she have, what did she want to know, and how involved did she want to be with her own care. It seemed that she was always a little bit after the fact.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Jenna, same question. What spoke to you?
What really stood out to me was when she was in the office with the physician and she was asking the doctor, you know, are we just waiting for this treatment to fail? And the doctor said, well, really, we're waiting for we're watching the treatment as it goes. But I want you to know this is going to be your quality of life going forward. And that really spoke to me as a patient, that quality of life is so crucial, and talking with the doctor and the doctor being honest about what quality of life treatments are going to bring. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Nancy, could you answer that?
What really spoke to me was her courage, kind of. She didn't just take herself into account, but she took what her loved ones wanted into account. There seemed to be one point where I think she would have made a different choice, but her significant other was right there saying, we'll do it, you can do it. And I think oftentimes patients, their decisions are based not just on themselves, but around their family. So that really spoke to me.
John?
Well, I'd like to just a little bit of background and perspective. About almost 15 years ago now, my father was diagnosed with cancer, and it wasn't. Prognosis was kind of the same, and so this movie really spoke to me, kind of reminding me of what this journey and process was like. And the questions that were being raised were, who am I after all of this and going through this experience? And yeah, that's kind of what spoke to me. I mean, looking for answers and wanting some sort of definitive response, and that's just not possible in a lot of situations. And the struggle and the way you, as someone going through it, I can only imagine, but as certainly somebody supporting somebody going through it, yeah, those are hard questions and hard terms to come to. That there just may not be an answer here.
Thank you. At this time, I just wanted to remind you here in the theater that we will be taking your questions after the next series of questions I'm going to be posing to the panel. So just think about them and kind of be ready after we finish the next sequence. And for those of you who are online, you can submit your questions through a form on the live stream, and I will get them here on my computer. What I'd like, and certainly I'd like to try to get as many questions answered as possible from those who are attending this program. So at this point, I'm going to ask specific questions of our panel. I'm going to start with you, Jenna. And certainly I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that we know you are not facing end-of-life care decisions, but you are navigating unknowns about the trajectory of serious illness. So please tell us about the challenges of communication with healthcare providers in understanding your diagnosis, treatment options, and prognosis, and what steps have you taken to improve communication?
Yeah, that's a great question, tough question. So with my diagnosis, it was a little bit, is this on? Can you guys hear? You cannot? Is that better? So my diagnosis was a little bit less straightforward. It wasn't like I went to the doctor and had a test and they said that I had cancer. So it took actually years and many doctors to get a diagnosis. So there was a lot of unknown, like you were talking about, John, that for several years, and 25 doctors until I finally got a diagnosis. And there was a lot of fear in that time, but there was also a lot of anger and resentment. And what I realized is I was a horrible patient communicator during that time because of that fear and that resentment. And what I came to realize is the doctors really were trying to help me, but we're living in a different time and our system is broken. Our medical system is broken. And so what I realized is if I was going to make progress with my illness, that I was going to have to really own it, and I was going to have to start initiating a lot of the questions and conversations that I needed answers for. And I was very fortunate. I found a doctor who was straightforward with me, and he said, Jenna, now this is years later and after 25 doctors, some of which were dismissive, he said, you're very sick, and if you want to consider getting better, you need, if at all possible, you need to quit your work, which I was already on short-term leave, but he was saying this is a long-term process. It's not going to fix itself overnight, and your chance of getting better. He was the first doctor to address the fact that there was more than just being sick and getting better. There was a whole lifestyle that I was going to have to start to address. And as far as treatments, that was part of what Bernie was asking about. You know, he said there are no approved treatments at this point. There is no cure for the illness that you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the best that we can, and I need to know from you what it is that you want. So he taught me how to be a good patient communicator, which was excellent because I had to move to Vermont and find all new doctors about 3 years ago. And coming into Vermont, we kind of know that there's a bit of a doctor shortage, so we all are challenged by that to begin with. But I was prepared to go into my doctor saying, hey, I know that this is not much is known about this disease. But what I need from you is a partner and someone who can help me navigate what to do next. And she was very, very straightforward with me and said, I have one other patient with your diagnosis, so we're gonna do this together. But what I realized is when I realized that there was a system that was broken and it wasn't the doctor that was being the problem, then I could take control of my own health. So now I go to appointments very prepared. I have questions to ask ahead of time. I have questions for my family to ask ahead of time. And oftentimes I just take someone with me to the appointment because cognitively I don't always remember things. And I take a lot of notes. So I've made progress with my illness, but it didn't happen until I took responsibility for it.
Thank you. And again, it was very purposeful on our part to have Jenna, who's dealing with a chronic illness, on this panel. Because as you can hear, the process that she's going through is really very similar to someone who's dealing with a terminal illness. It's about taking responsibility, asking the questions, letting the doctor know that you really are interested in hearing some answers, if there are answers. And I have a question now for, actually for John. You actually, could you move your mic closer, Nancy, both of you? Yeah, we were just getting some feedback that it's helpful. Great, thank you. So this is for John. As an attorney working in estate planning, you encourage clients to complete an advance directive and name an agent in order to fulfill their preferences for medical care, especially if incapacitated. So I want to ask you to describe what typically occurs at a meeting to discuss advance directives when someone is healthy.
Well, in most instances, that's the situation. People are coming in to do kind of plan for contingencies and plan for unknown situations. And what I generally try to focus on in discussing particularly advanced directives, is that we don't necessarily know what circumstances you're going to, you might be faced with, and that the importance of choosing an appropriate advocate, an agent, who would be able to stand in your stead if you're not able to communicate with your physician. And emphasizing, really, because we don't know, no one has a crystal ball, that it's really important to have discussions with your agent to make sure that they understand what your wishes are.
Which is a very good exercise, theoretically, right?
Very much so,
When
yeah.
someone is healthy. And I want to have a follow-up to that, and that is, what have you witnessed when your clients revisit their advance directives when they become seriously ill?
Well, and that's really fairly interesting. I have never had a client come to me and say, I'm experiencing a severe illness, and now I really want to make sure we tailor the advance directive to my wishes under these circumstances. Usually what we're planning for is, an unknown, a contingency. What would happen if suddenly you were found in this situation? Who would you want to be your advocate and your voice and make sure that your wishes are followed and known? It's very, I have not experienced somebody coming back and saying, I have a terminal illness and now I want to make sure that everything is laid out in my advance directive the way I'd like to see it.
Which I think we all will find really fascinating, that you've never had that experience, that someone will come back when their circumstances change to really talk through with you from a legal standpoint, right?
Certainly from, if the more other elements of estate planning can come up. But usually, even at that point, they're just comforted in knowing that they have somebody who will be able to step in and make those decisions for them. It's really has not been a lot about providing a lot of direction to the agent to do so.
So it's the way it was originally in many instances, is what you're really saying. It doesn't change.
It doesn't, not in my experience. It was an interesting question for that very reason. I think with an advanced directive, you can, under the Vermont statute, you can get very detailed in terms of, what type of treatment and under what circumstances, and it's kind of rare that people find themselves in that circumstance, where it's all kind of laid out for them and they can see this is the path that I want to take. Oftentimes we don't know, and some of these questions don't have answers, and you want to make sure you have the ability for somebody to make those decisions and step in and be that advocate for you. But it's hard to know in advance what they might be advocating for.
Right. It's like, how does the advanced directive really serve the patient, the person, and their family becomes the question. And I think we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into that as we go along.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Great. So Nancy, okay, in your work with seriously ill patients at the hospital, you may already have a copy of the patient's advance directive, or you may ask them to complete one. So preferences for end-of-life care are documented in the chart. So as a medical social worker, and you have training in understanding the psychological factors that influence a patient's decisions about care, can you talk about why patients change their minds about preferences for care that were previously documented in the advance directive?
Well, I think a lot of times it's fear-based. Fear of dying, fear of the future, not really knowing what's going to be happening and really running the other way. We see a lot of times that patients who have an advance directive may, at the last moment, change their minds, or their healthcare proxy may change their minds, and a lot of it is just the family struggling to hold on, or the patient really just not wanting to let their loved ones go. It really, for a lot of families, there's a lot of conflict around it, and nobody is usually all on the same page. And it's really hard to watch sometimes and to kind of get them all on the same page and remember to focus on the patient is the one we're here serving. You are here honoring what the patient wants. And that can be very challenging and difficult.
Yeah. For sure. And you're in the midst of it, as are the other members of the healthcare team caring for this patient. And I suspect sometimes nowadays that the members of the team, hospitalists, may not really know the patients all that well. And now you're put in the position of having to counsel them, guide them in terms of dealing with what the conflicts may be between family members.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about what position you find yourselves and other members of the healthcare team in those situations?
Oh, yes. So any kind of crisis, medical crisis, the thought of a loved one dying is kind of a family crisis. It's a time where they're not thinking all the time properly, emotions are really high, and they're really not knowing what to do in a particular situation. And if there's already conflict or difficulties in a family, it intensifies during those particular times, and It really just is about kind of getting them all together and really just listening to what everybody has to say, kind of starting where they're at, and really allowing them, some of them just to vent and to get some of that out there on the table, and to be able to put some of that aside so then you can refocus on what the real issue is.
It's complicated,
It
for
is.
sure, you know, and it's like really trying to draw out from each member of the family, you know, what their motivation is, which could be very interesting, actually. Why their perspective is to do one thing and the patient may want to do another, and maybe siblings or children and so forth. So you're really, I'm sure, find yourself in that mix of maybe refereeing or
It feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's complicated. So what I'd like to do now, I'm asking online for people to submit questions, and we have some. But I'd like to just ask you who are here in the theater, if you have any questions, just to raise your hand, and we will get you a mic. I don't know where Maggie went, but, oh, there she is. If you could, if you don't mind, Maggie, to bring the mic to the questioner. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael. I usually don't need a microphone, but I'll do it this time. How long have advanced directives been around? 10, 15, 20 years? That's not the question. I just want to double check that, because I'm going back about 20 years when I first heard of it.
They were common when I started practicing 25 years ago.
Okay.
So I know that Vermont used to have two different statutes, a durable power of attorney for healthcare statute and a living will, and that has been kind of combined into a comprehensive advanced healthcare directive statute. But I believe Vermont's had something on the books since probably the mid-'80s.
Thank you, John. Question, really, it strikes me, if something that's been around for 25 years, let's say that, just for the hell of it, if you will, 20 years ago I put an advanced directive together. Shouldn't I be looking at it now, at my more stately, older age? Because in the meantime, no doubt, many medical advances have been made that might have, in fact, sort of nullified the need for a certain type of advanced directive or a certain decision in an advanced directive. Isn't this the kind of, is or is not an advanced directive, perhaps the kind of thing not only that you should review with your family and your loved ones, but you ought to review on a regular basis to see, is that still applicable? Is that decision, the way I made it, still necessary, or is that decision still appropriate? That's my question.
Okay, and in case it wasn't heard, I'm assuming because you have the mic, the question has been heard by the folks who are online. You're really talking about the value of really reevaluating, going back and revisiting this document.
Yes.
And it's interesting that John just said that when his clients, he's never had a client who, when he or she became ill, has actually gone back to review it with him. So this is your question, and I'll just ask the panel if they have any thoughts about that.
I believe that would be a wonderful thing to do, but I would agree that it doesn't happen. And I kind of look at the living will as a guide, and as you said, things change in your own life. Medical conditions can change. Who knew we were going to have a pandemic in the last 2 years? And I think reviewing it is certainly helpful, not only to you, but whoever your medical power of attorney is or family members. They need to be updated on that as much as possible, because in many cases, that medical power of attorney will be the ultimate decision maker.
Thank you.
That's pretty much the question.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Because I have a question for Dr. Welther. As a primary care doctor, you had many years of experience with patients and their families about end-of-life care options, such as whether to continue aggressive treatments or enrollment in hospice. How have you managed end-of-life care discussions with the family, patient and family, who have different views about their preferences for care, which is something that Nancy was talking about in the hospital situation, but I'm just interested in hearing from the primary care, who often knows these patients and families very, very well.
Well, my perspective is usually at the beginning, at the time of diagnosis. Oftentimes I'm the first person that patients will see, and then we get the treatment, and not the treatment, the testing done to determine what the diagnosis is, and then we often will refer to an oncologist or a surgeon or whatever is needed. And then I'll get involved again towards the end of life when things have failed or they're at a point where they're trying to decide whether they want to continue treatment. Occasionally we'll have points where I will be in contact with them at these decision points where they're trying to make a decision, but often I'm most involved at the beginning and at the end. And the more we know at the beginning, obviously that makes a huge difference and reduces some of that conflict that Nancy was talking about. But emotions run high at the time of an acute problem, and many times the patient will disregard whatever they said in their advance directive. And there's actually been some studies recently that advance directives do not correlate with decisions that patients make at the time of serious illness. And then I have had instances where family has gotten significantly involved. I've had children of parents who have a serious illness who do not want to tell the patient their diagnosis or their prognosis. They want to keep that from the patient. I've seen siblings where you have siblings where one is gung-ho for let's do everything and keep mom or dad alive for as long as possible, and others say let's let them make the decision. And those conflicts become very difficult to handle, particularly at those crucial times. As I said before, I think the medical power of attorney is the most important thing that needs to be determined. The person who is making a living will picks the person that they trust to make decisions for them if and when they cannot. And that person then has the legal ability to decide for them when the patient is not able to make those decisions. And when these conflicts occur, then that person does have the ability to decide to do or not to do certain procedures and or extensions of life. So I think that is the most important thing, and obviously that communication between the patient and their medical power of attorney is crucial, and then it has to be a very trusting relationship.
Can I just add on that?
Oh, please.
It's really important who you designate as your healthcare agent to make sure they're going to honor what your wishes are, because they can choose something different than what your wishes are written. So it's really important to pick somebody who's going to be your voice and not just the oldest child or your husband, somebody who's going to be able to do that for you.
In the living will and this COLS form, which is Clinical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatments, is a form, are guides. And the guides are based on what the patient thinks that they would like to do for themselves. It can be very specific. It can be, I want to be hospitalized, I want antibiotics, I want a feeding tube, or I don't want any of these things. And that guide then can be helpful to the person who, again, may have to make those difficult decisions if the individual is not able to make those decisions for themselves.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you. Am I interpreting you saying that if an advance directive has been signed by the patient and they've decided who the clinic advisor will be, a client, and it's signed by an attorney, that someone in the family can override that advance directive? Hello?
Yeah, meaning, just to make sure I understand the question, if you've designated an agent
Yeah?
in your advance directive and it's all been properly legally executed,
Yeah?
so there's really two parts to an advance directive. One is nominating the agent and giving someone authority to make decisions if you can't communicate with your physician. The second part of it can get very detailed in terms of what you want to have happen in specific instances. And the ultimate authority in that instance then is the agent who you've appointed. Anybody else, another family member or somebody else coming in saying, you need to do this, their opinion could be heard, but the agent is the one who makes the final decision.
Right.
My understanding is that what you've put in your advance directive provides the guidelines, and this is what should happen. Circumstances, it can change, and you could say, I don't want to be resuscitated at all, for example. Or I don't want any medical intervention, if I'm in a terminal state. But the actual circumstances that may be present may conflict with your other wishes.
Right.
So for example, you could say, I don't want any extraordinary measures taken. As we've learned in the past, you might think of a ventilator or an intubation or something like that. But as we just kind of learned with the pandemic, that may be your best chance for pulling through. So the agent can, I believe, under the right circumstances, say, okay, well, the advance directive says I must do A, B, or C, but I'm going to choose D because that's really in the best interest in what I believe my principal, the person who appointed me, would want under these circumstances. So there is, some of it's written very firmly and some of it's a bit flexible. Again, it depends how the directive is actually worded and written.
Right.
But,
yeah, so if the client has a client agent that the patient has signed this advance directive, dated it, attorney has signed it, doctor has signed it, so that client agent, since it signed that advance directive as it was made out at that time or whenever, can't change that, can they? That would be
It's not black and white, unfortunately. And COVID is a good example. A lot of people got sick enough that the decision was made to go on a ventilator. If an advance directive said, I never want to be put on a ventilator, but they weren't able to make that decision, the power of attorney could say, let's try it for 3 or 4 days and see if they are better. So he could override that specific thing in the advance directives, but he also knows what the person had in mind as far as I don't want to be on a breathing machine for the rest of my life. So they will say, we'll try it for 3 or 4 days to see if the condition changes, and then we'll stop. And we do a lot of that also with people who've had strokes and brain bleeds and things like that. We try things for a few days. The power of attorney may say, let's try it, or they may just say, don't even try it. We'll just stop right here because the prognosis is poor or whatever the situation is.
I guess I was under the impression that advance directive is for the benefit of the patient, not the person looking into the patient, that kind of thing. That's what I thought that was supposed to be for, not for someone to say, oh, gee, she really probably didn't want that, we'll change it.
That's why you need a trustworthy medical power of attorney.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Constance.
This is is really just a question for all of us. I wonder how many of us have actually sat down and discussed with our healthcare power of attorney person our real feelings, or did we just check the box off when our attorney said, oh, have you done this? Okay, who are you gonna name? Oh, I'll name my daughter or my son or something. Have we actually sat down and discussed with them how we feel, or we expect them through osmosis to know?
I have some people that are actually surprised they were designated as a healthcare agent.
Yes. No, again, it's back to communication. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that in a moment. But let me just take an online question, then we can go back to the people here in the theater. Here's a question. As a physician, I know the limitations of medicine. As many studies show, aggressive treatment after a diagnosis of a terminal illness or progression after initial remission doesn't extend life and creates harm. Given the mistrust many Americans have of the healthcare system, some due to systemic racism and others with misinformation, how do physicians accurately inform and help guide those patients and families with appropriate medical options? For example, do nothing, palliative care, hospice, etc. I'll ask Dr. Welther this one.
I think the key is a physician-patient relationship. Again, I may be biased, I'm a family physician, so I get to know my patients over a long period of time. In many cases, I know their children, their parents, their grandparents. I think having that knowledge allows you to better find that place where they want to be and understand where they want to be, or understand what their questions really are. Many times physicians are trying to guess, what does a patient want to know? What don't they want to know? Are they prepared to know what I'm going to tell them? I would think that's extremely difficult in a hospital situation where you have a hospitalist who doesn't know you and they may change every other day. Or again, in a very emotional, very stressful, acute situation. So I think when Jenna said the system is broken, I think in some ways the system is broken because that relationship is not always a high priority. And that relationship and that communication, I think, is crucial.
Yeah, and actually a question just came in online, which is the question that you asked, Kansi, about, that there really should be an effort for the person who's making out the advance directive and the person they've designated to have conversations about this. And this person online said, even using other forms, whether reading materials or a movie, huh? How about that? That would really generate more specific conversation about this. And one of the things, and actually Dr. Welther noted it, I'm going to talk about it in a moment, is that, and John actually made mention of it earlier, is that people tend to complete this advance directive and it gets shuttered away somewhere, not discussed even with the agents. And when the time comes, and we raise the question, like, how come people change their minds? Because conversations about what the preferences are often are not discussed from the time the advance directive was signed to the time when someone is at that point where they're really having to face end-of-life care decisions. And therein lies a major problem. You've all touched upon it. Everyone on this panel has, and the questions that have come in here in the theater, as well as online. It seems to me that what we're really talking about is the importance of having ongoing conversations. And who initiates that? Okay, I would think the person whose life we're talking about would have an investment in that. I think that the loved ones would have an investment in that as well. So I'm just also, again, how time really moves so quickly here in these programs. I just wanted to actually make a little bit of time now to kind of take what all of you have discussed, pointed out, and kind of bring it together so you really have some perspective on really what, not only what are we talking about in terms of the problem, but what are we talking about in terms of solutions? How do we address this? And again, it's been touched upon by the panel and your questions as well. So what I'd like to do is turn now to summarize what we've been talking about. And as you can see, there's a quote up here, and everyone's seeing it online as well. And this is really critical, and it's just what I said, that despite the intrinsic logic of advanced care planning, advanced directives, the evidence suggests it does not have the desired effect. Many clinicians may be disappointed that promoting conversations with patients well in advance of needed medical decisions has not proved subsequent care as hoped. And these are there are some recent studies that really support this, and that's why a lot of folks in the medical community who had assumed that if you spend time with your patients, you go over these advanced directives, they go over them with the family, the agents, that somehow it would carry to that point when end-of-life care decisions need to be made. And what the study found was a vast majority of patients, when they reached that point of end-of-life decision-making, changed their minds. A majority changed their minds from what they initially said, which was they wanted comfort care, and when it came to time, they chose aggressive treatments, which, by the way, did not prolong their lives, probably causing greater pain, suffering, and regrets for them and their families. So we have here this conversation about advanced directives, and the question is, what's missing with advanced directives? And again, I really thank all of you because you touched on it already. That is that there needs to be, the advanced directive needs to be a living document that is revisited, just like the question from Michael. And with your loved ones and with healthcare providers, and especially if someone's seriously ill, and that the attorneys need to be advised of these changes. The idea that ongoing conversations are absolutely necessary for one's wishes, one's values, one's preferences, is something now where we kind of said, yeah, that makes sense. We now have the data from these studies to actually support that. So we're back to, what are the solutions? How do we handle this? What do we do about this? This becoming a process rather than a static completion of a document. So what we think about is, in our work certainly, is that speaking sooner. And that term that we use is very purposeful, because it is all about not only speaking sooner, but continuing to talk about what preferences are. I remember talking one time with Dr. Welther, and he said, you know, yeah, of course. And don't we all go for annual physical exams? Don't we visit with our healthcare providers? And this could be opportunity year after year. And there may not be any change in health status, but then again, there could be. And so in some ways, it's actually built in to be able to have these kinds of conversations with our healthcare providers. So, as I turn the page, I really wanted to emphasize that we're talking about open and honest communication. But we're also talking about, how does this happen? How do these conversations take place? And in our work with our programs, whether they be in medical practices or community programs like this, we do strongly encourage that patients take the lead in opening conversations with their healthcare providers. Somehow we all have an assumption, right? We have doctors, they're smart. They should know what my concerns are. They should be able to be mind readers. And lo and behold, they're not, and they're busy. And so if we don't take the time to really ask the questions, express our concerns, then if you're fortunate to have a physician who will ask some of these questions about your preferences, if something happens, if something changes with the health status, well, then it may not come up and probably doesn't come up in conversation. So, what I really wanted to talk about in kind of bringing that together is that these conversations about preferences, end-of-life care, are hard. They're very hard. And in fact, none of us probably really want to talk about this. And what we've also observed and read in the medical literature is that there can be what's called a collusion of silence. No one really wants to talk about it. However, the consequences can really be devastating. So, who has the most at stake? Patients and their families. And yes, they need to be prepared to open these conversations. I can tell you, and you've all received a copy of the guide, which is Speak Sooner, A Patient's Guide to Difficult Conversations. And the folks who are in their homes or at their offices online, they can access this guide at our website, speaksooner.org. And there are also videos of patients talking about these issues. The point I'm really making is it's really critical that we are prepared to open these conversations. That's the process. And there need to be ongoing conversations, not just one time, complete this, and then it's that end-of-life care conversation, which Nancy talked about in the hospital, where there may be very differing views. Dr. Welther talked about it in terms of in his office with families. These can be really excruciatingly painful conversations because there's been no real preparation. You know, it's like almost like, in a sense, having these conversations, you begin to get familiar with really understanding what your health status is and really being involved in the decision-making process. Again, we're not accustomed to that. This is really a shift in paradigm because we really often look to our healthcare providers to tell us what to do and when to do it. So, it's something that we feel actually very strongly about, and for the last 20 years, we've been employing this approach of patients taking the lead. I think by hearing what the panel had to say, and Jenna in particular, that she had to learn that it's going to be up to her. And what the result of that is, you really get more information, you figure out things about what the options are, and then you can make the decisions. And it's really no different when we're going through a serious illness, and there are many points where there has to be transitions in care. Things change. And those kinds of conversations are critical because it opens up all kinds of possibilities about what are the next steps? What do we do? And so if you want to be ready, you want to be prepared, it's going to be a matter of really opening these conversations much sooner, that whether we or our healthcare providers feel comfortable with. So this is really the message that we wanted to convey at this point in terms of bringing it together, because it's so frustrating, it's so overwhelming to really consider at the time your decisions, your options, I should say, in terms of end-of-life care. And so if you have the experience, if you build, as Dr. Welther said, the relationship, the partnership with your healthcare team, you are really much better prepared to make decisions when that time comes. So that's something I want to convey. Yes?
You know, looking at the movie, if Chaz early on or right at her diagnosis was able to look into herself, into her own desires, and possibly use this workbook to identify what her real wishes were, it would have made it much easier for her wife Nancy, particularly as things were getting worse, because in many cases it seemed like Nancy was pushing maybe a little bit more than Chaz wanted to do. I think that could have reversed if Chaz had been able to express herself early on a little bit more, particularly right at the beginning of her diagnosis when she was feeling well but told that she has stage 4 cancer.
Yeah, and again, really emphasizing that, and here's the title of our program, right? Comfort or conflict in end-of-life care. And, you know, it's never easy. You know, it's never easy. None of us want to leave this earth. But then again, none of us want to suffer or have a loved one suffer. So, as the example in the film, you know, if they had some way, some guide, that could have been very helpful to them in terms of thinking through the decision-making throughout the course of her illness. I mean, her dying process and having all these people around her was really wonderful. It was very loving and very gentle. But the road from when she was diagnosed to that point was pretty rocky. And there could have been ways in which these issues could have been addressed more thoroughly along the trajectory of her illness. I know we're getting close. I just want, is there any last questions? Michael, do you want to?
Just a couple of things. Number one, maybe Dr. Welther could speak about this. How do you get the doctor's time to focus on this when you want to initiate those conversations? That's number one. And number two, it's almost 15 minutes ago, as you were speaking on the panel, you used the terms power of attorney, advance directive, and what was the third?
Living will.
Pardon?
He mentioned living will as well.
Yes, the living will, as though they are interchangeable. I just wanted to see if there
I
is
think there are
interchangeability.
three
in
parts
that.
of the same thing.
Okay.
They're just components of the same thing.
Okay.
And as I said, I think the most important is the person who you trust to be the decision maker at the end. But they're all part of the same thing. And ideally, is the whole thing is spilled out at that time when you are talking with your doctor. As far as the time factor, I don't have a good answer for that. There's a lot of pressure to see patients and keep things moving along. We do have a yearly physical, but particularly with people who have a lot of problems and a lot of medications, it takes up a lot of time, and there are increasing things that are being demanded, including memory testing, get up and go, vision. All these things are being more asked of us to do at physicals, which are great and very important, but again, take time that reduces some of these other issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But I will say again, Dr. Welther knows all too well, anyone who's been to their primary care doctor will know as well, there are these time pressures. But again, if you don't take the lead and open up with these questions and concerns, it's not likely to happen. And that is the message throughout the whole trajectory of illness. So that's one to really just keep in mind, okay? Well, I think we're getting pretty close to the end of our program. Again, there's so many more questions that came online, and as we talk, I'm sure more questions would come up. But if you do have questions, you'd like us to try to answer them, I would say to submit them online, and we'll do our best to get back to you with the answers. As with most of these programs, there's a lot of things we want to say in terms of thanking folks, because we can't do these programs without a lot of support. So first, I'd really like to thank our panel. I thought they really offered a lot of insight into the complexities of advanced directives, but really what happens at the end of life if you don't take the time to have these kinds of conversations sooner. So thank you all. I just would like to thank Citizen Films and Groundspark. You might have noticed that they are the producers of this film, and they were very gracious in permitting us to use it. It is actually an exclusive screening of this film here. The only other place you can see it is at film festivals throughout the country. So I spoke with them, Zoomed them, and we had a Zoom meeting, and it was really wonderful because they really were so greatly supportive of the work that we're doing and wanted to contribute the film to this event. We're also grateful to our sponsors, as you see up there, and it really, these are the folks who help financially support these programs that we present to you. And we couldn't do these programs, I should say, without our Center for Communication and Medicine staff, our board, and the tech assistance from the team at Bennington Performing Arts Center. And of course, we hope this program is helpful. At least it's a starting place to think about what really you need to do or your loved ones need to do to begin these kinds of conversations much sooner. And for more information about our programs, and you can actually access, as I said earlier, the online version of the guide, and you can view a recording of this event at speaksooner.org. It'll probably take us a couple of weeks to get it edited, but we will have it up there. So if anyone you know missed the program or unable to attend, they'll be able to see it. And also, when you're at the website, I would really highly recommend reading Celia Engel-Bandman's blog, Medical Humanist Notes. Very insightful and very helpful. And so I really thank you all for joining us this evening, and I certainly hope to see you again. And listen, remember to speak sooner. Thank you. Thank you all.